Hello, and welcome to Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday. I chose this case because I hadn't heard this moniker before, the Bayou Strangler. As soon as I started to research it, I learned that this killer is a gay man who actually tried his hand at being a drag queen. He failed miserably, and part of that failure is what contributed to his behavior. Right now in this country, there is a fervor of anti-drag queen madness occurring, which is something I find so utterly ridiculous. It makes me embarrassed to be an American. Drag queens have existed for thousands of years. Because they've now gained more acceptance and popularity, the extremist nutjobs have come out of the woodwork complaining about them. It's very similar to the satanic panic of the 1980s. It's laughable. People blaming something for what they think is a problem when really there are 1,000 things in line that they should be blaming before that. People are complaining that kids shouldn't be exposed to drag queens, as if the drag queens are the problem. The damn kids are getting molested at church, my friends. My Lord, we have so many real issues to get riled up, but people are afraid their kids are going to see a man in a dress. Those same people let their kids watch professional wrestling, the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. They take their kids to Hooters, all where everybody's wearing nothing, but that's okay, because it's not really about protecting children. It's about bigotry. So when I found out that this killer was a gay man and that he had a very short and unsuccessful stint at drag, one part of me was like, oh, I shouldn't cover this right now. But the bigger part of me knew I was going to, because my friends, stories like this teach us some much needed lessons. And as you will see today, the moral of this story is that we are all so very much more alike than we are different. Killers are so very much alike, even when their sexuality or their economic status or their politics differ. Some people are so determined to follow the narrative that we have these great dividers between us. And I'm here to tell you, it just ain't true. At the end of the day, we are all very much alike. We want the same things, we love the same things, we feel the same emotions, and when we are violent with each other, that violence stems from the same places: abuse, bullying, and a feeling of rejection. Those experiences are never excuses for bad behavior, but they are most often precursors to violence. This is the story of a very sad man who couldn't find love and acceptance in any part of his life. And in his mind, someone was going to suffer for his sadness. This is the story of serial killer Ronald Dominique, the Bayou Strangler. Let's get into it. November 2006. Our story begins in Houma, Louisiana. A man named Ricky Wallace has a scheduled visit with his probation officer. Ricky is feeling talkative on that day, and so he starts to tell his parole officer about a recent experience he had. He says a chubby white guy in a pickup truck pulled him over as Ricky was walking down the street. This chubby white guy tells Ricky that he has a family member who is the victim of abuse, and therefore she has some weird hang-ups about sex. She prefers to pay strangers for sex. The white guy asks Ricky if he's interested in making some money. He shows a photograph to Ricky of an adult female and says, "This is who I'm talking about." Ricky agrees to the deal, and he gets in the truck with the man and they drive away. They arrive here at this travel trailer and they go inside. The white guy tells Ricky that because his relative is scared of men, before she comes out, he needs to tie Ricky up, and then he goes and grabs some rope from one of these cabinets. Ricky says, "Absolutely not. You are not tying me up. Take me back to where you picked me up from." Surprisingly, the chubby white guy doesn't put up a fuss. He simply takes Ricky back to where he picked him up, he dropped him off, and then he left. But the probation officer is listening, and he alerts the police. What Ricky Wallace doesn't know is that for a decade, men have been disappearing and turning up dead in this area, and the probation officer thinks Ricky may have just escaped this killer. Ricky Wallace then takes the police to the trailer where he said this attack occurred. The police note the location and they photograph the outside of the trailer, but they don't confront the man inside. Instead, they decide to put a surveillance team on him. For days and then weeks, they watch this man come and go from work at an oil field supply company, but he does nothing out of the ordinary. The man never leaves his trailer unless he's going to work. He doesn't go to the bars, he doesn't go to the movies. He sits in his trailer on his sister's property alone. So police step up their investigation. They go directly to the man who lives in the trailer and they tell him they've been watching him. They know he is Ronald Dominique and they want to ask him some questions. The man complies, and as the police talk with him, they begin to seriously doubt the story Ricky Wallace told them. Ronald Dominique is a marshmallow of a man. He's got no personality. He seems nice. He's very overweight and out of shape. Police don't think he's even strong enough or in fit enough condition to take on another adult male. Ronald Dominique is the farthest thing from threatening. He's somewhat effeminate, he's soft-spoken, and frankly, he just seems like a wimp. Now, there's an important element to this story. You might be thinking, how does everyone in this area not know that there is a serial killer running around, killing dozens of men? Well, think about that time period. Hurricane Katrina hit in August of 2005, and the entire state of Louisiana was severely affected. The last thing police were working on was solving cold case murders. But for years, there had been rumors of a serial killer in the area. Reporters for some of the local papers had been tipped off by law enforcement on several occasions. The problem was there just wasn't enough information to follow up on. And of course, they were covering a lot of other stories related to the hurricane and the usual crime in the area. The other thing that hindered the development of any case for a serial killer was the location the bodies were being found. Yes, men were turning up dead, but they were not only miles apart, they were towns apart. They were even counties apart. The dump spots were kind of similar in some cases, but that's just because all of the land in Louisiana is similar. Police couldn't find the evidence they needed in order to definitively state that the men were being killed by the same killer. Not until after Hurricane Katrina did police realize they had a serial killer, and that's simply because the killer's behavior began to escalate in a way that linked his victims together. Once the determination was made that there was definitely a serial killer operating in the area, Ronald Dominique went to the top of that suspect list. We're going to go back in time a little bit and discuss how this all began. July 1997. A 19-year-old man named David Levon Mitchell was hitchhiking home from a wedding he'd attended when he disappeared. David's body was later found down this desolate road. Police worked the case trying to determine how David got all the way off of the main road and who took him, who killed him, and who dumped him. While they were still investigating, in December of 1997, a road worker found the body of 20-year-old Gary Pierre about 6 miles from where David was found. In July of 1998, 5 miles from that site, the body of 38-year-old Larry Ranson was discovered. The killer was putting the bodies where they would be found. There wasn't any effort made to hide them. All of the men were living a high-risk lifestyle. They were homeless, they were addicted to drugs, and there was any number of reasons that they might turn up dead. So again, this made linking the deaths together even more difficult. Most of the time, the men had been tied up. They were bound, but not always, so that also sent mixed messages to the police. To complicate the investigation even further, there were 2 other serial killers active in Louisiana at the time, Derek Todd Lee and Sean Gillis. So the police really had their hands full, and investigating was difficult. The police readily admit that because the other 2 serial killers were killing young, attractive women, those murders were getting a lot more publicity than the deaths of homeless, drug-addicted men, and most of the men were known homosexuals. We just don't care about the murders of men the way we care about the murders of women, do we? And we definitely don't care as much about the killings of gay men. The killings didn't get a lot of attention or a lot of press, and they continued. October 5th, 1998, 27-year-old Oliver LeBancs was found strangled. 2 weeks later, on October 21st, 16-year-old Joseph Brown was found beaten and strangled as well. November 27th, 18-year-old Bruce Williams was found suffocated. Throughout the summer of 1999, the bodies of Manuel Reed, Mitchell Johnson, and Angel Mieja were all found in Jefferson Parish. Most of the victims were small, black men, and they were all men who didn't own a car. They walked everywhere they went, making it easy for them to be picked up. In 2000, 23-year-old Michael Vincent was found dumped and laid over a barbed wire fence in Houma, Louisiana, which is some distance from the other dump sites. So now the police had 9 bodies in downtown New Orleans and 1 in Houma, and for almost 3 years, it remained that way. But in 2002, the body of Kenneth Randolph Jr. was found, followed by the bodies of Anoka Jones and Detrell Woods. Winter of 2004, Larry Matthews, Michael Barnett, and Leon Lorette were all found dead in Terrebonne Parish. So again, you can see why this was baffling for police. Even though the men had some similarities, the distances they were found apart, that alone causes an issue. Then throw in the fact that they were homeless or they lived from family to family, they were couch surfing. It was difficult to track them. Sometimes they weren't even reported as missing until their bodies turned up. In 2005, police had enough information to solidify the serial killer theory. They went public with that theory and informed the press and the public that they were forming a task force to investigate the multiple murders. Some of the rooms inside headquarters were set up for that task force to work with, and the walls were lined with the 16, then 17, then 18, and 19 photos of the victims, and then the hurricane hit. That, of course, caused a very serious delay with everything going on in the investigation, and for months, the task force wasn't able to work the case as it normally would. By 2006, police had 23 young men dead in about a 60-mile radius surrounding New Orleans. 23. The police had conducted hundreds of interviews and followed thousands of leads, but there was never any solid case against one individual. That is, until Ricky Wallace came forward with the story about the chubby white man living alone in a trailer. The more police looked into Ronald Dominique, the more intriguing he became to them. They find out that Ronald is and always has been a loner. He didn't have friends in high school, and he doesn't have friends as an adult. He lives in Bayou Blue on a piece of land his sister lets him stay on in a little travel trailer. He works a blue-collar job and just seems like a regular guy. He has quite a sad life story. When he was a child, Ronald's father believed his mother to be having an affair. With who? Her own brother. So the father put the kids in the car and drove them to their uncle's house, and there Ronald's father found his wife in bed with her own brother. So here we go again. I have seen estimates as high as 90%. I don't know if I believe it's quite that high, but many serial killers have a mother who would be considered immoral, a mother who participated in overtly sexual or promiscuous or taboo behavior that others would consider immoral, bringing shame to her children. Ronald knew this about his mother, and it made for a complicated relationship with her. But at the same time, Ronald stayed close to his mother. This is something we also see. They were kind of enmeshed. Ronald relied on his mother for housing and food well into his adulthood. Ronald is described as aimless. He didn't amount to anything. He couldn't get a girlfriend in his early teen years, and then, by the time he had figured out that he was gay, he couldn't get a boyfriend. Remember what I said in the beginning about how we are all very much alike? Well, the gay world can be brutal. If you're not thin and beautiful, there are a lot of gay people that aren't interested in you. Ronald Dominique was neither thin nor beautiful. Even after Ronald came out of the closet, he struggled to fit in. He was short, he was heavy, and he had a bad attitude. He was a Debbie Downer. He was a wet blanket. He complained about everything: the weather, the food, the movie. He was no fun to be around. Then Ronald discovered the world of drag. He started trying his hand at makeup and wigs and dresses, and he flopped immediately. Drag queens are like the modern day clowns. Not only do they have to look a certain way, they have to be very quick-witted and very funny and smart. I feel like so many people have a misconception of what the world of drag is about. Yes, it's sometimes vulgar. Yes, they're swearing, but you hear that in movies. But not all drag queen content is mature content. That's like saying all movie content is mature content. It can be mature content, but it isn't always. They have to be very quick and they have to have really fast comebacks. They have to kind of roast the audience members, play with them verbally, kind of tease them, and they have to take a lot of insults as well. Ronald did not have this personality. He loved to be on stage and he loved the audience looking at him, but he just wasn't entertaining. He wasn't funny, he wasn't quick-witted, and he didn't look good. That makes me sad. I feel bad about that. It's hard to watch people fail, but he felt like he'd been rejected by the last safe place for him in the gay community. We all have rejection, no matter what our preferences are, no matter what lifestyle we live. This is why I'm always harping on the fact that we are so similar. We see this in the straight world. A boy feels rejected. He gets angry. Girls don't like him. He can't get the job that he wants. And then for whatever reason in some of these people, they decide they're going to take it out on everybody else. They don't ever want to put any energy into changing or improving themselves or finding out why they're failures. It becomes everyone else's fault. It's a very entitled attitude. It's very much an attitude of, I should have this. I have this coming to me. And if I don't get it, you're all going to pay. It's very arrogant, right? Happens in the gay world too. Ronald actually ended up getting bullied because of how poorly he did on stage. I hope that's something that has changed. I think the gay world has come a long way with regards to being more kind to those who are struggling, at least from what I've seen. It's getting better. There's still issues. In 1996, 2 different men accused Ronald of sexual assault, and Ronald was actually jailed once for 3 months. He ended up being released because prosecutors couldn't find the victims in order to have them testify. But while Ronald was in jail on one of these accusations, he was sexually assaulted and brutalized so badly that he ended up in the hospital. And this is what seemed to really, really change Ronald. His therapist, his prison-ordered therapist, said it was all Ronald talked about. He brought it up over and over. I know people like this. Something really bad happens to them, and I get it. It sucks when something like that occurs in your life. I get it, believe me. But they just can't get over it. They can't stop ruminating on the event, you know? It becomes their whole personality, and they just turn into a real sad sack. Far beyond being a victim, they kind of choose to make it their whole life, you know? I'm speaking from experience. I have things in my past I could complain about all day long, and no one would ever wonder why. But for my own sanity, I have chosen not to. Ronald never made that choice. This prison sexual assault became his entire life. And isn't that ironic and strange? He was allowed to assault other people, but by God, if someone did those things to him, how dare they, right? You see the arrogance, you know? This assault seems to have been the catalyst in Ronald Dominique's life. It changed him, and after that terrible event, he began killing. Police are learning all of these details about their suspect, and then they find out that the first place Ronald's sister lived, where she had allowed him to stay with her, was in St. Carlos Parish, the place where David Mitchell, Gary Pierre, and Larry Ranson were found murdered. When the sister moved to Houma, bodies began turning up in Houma. Ronald Dominique was starting to look better and better to the police. The one thing they couldn't figure out, these were all fit young men. How was 5'4", obese Ronald Dominique fighting and killing all these grown men? Then investigators linked Ronald Dominique to 31-year-old August Watkins, who was found murdered in 2005. At autopsy, the coroner was unable to establish a cause of death for August, and so his case was never linked to the others. The police began to open up more unsolved files. They realized that August Watkins was murdered just days before 23-year-old Kurt Cunningham was found bound and strangled in April of 2005. Alonzo Hogan was found soon after that. In August, 17-year-old Wayne Smith was found in a bayou. The summer heat had caused rapid decomposition and no cause of death could be determined. But Wayne was bound, and he was also a slight, fit black man. There was something else investigators began to realize as they grouped all the victims together. Most of the men were missing their shoes. Had their killer taken them? Or had he simply not put them back on his victims when he redressed them? 40-year-old Chris DeVille went missing in October of 2005 and was found here in an area much like the other victims, a cane field in a bayou. Christopher Sutterfield was found a few weeks later. The next month, Nicholas Pellegrin was found strangled. Then the killings abruptly stopped. Or if they hadn't stopped, the killer was hiding the bodies instead of leaving them out in the open. Now, keep in mind, all this time that they're investigating this, the cops are still dealing with the fact that after Hurricane Katrina, there were bodies laying out in the open, the bodies of people who died in the hurricane. So there was absolutely no way of knowing if any of these bodies were actually those of murdered men. Imagine how frustrated the police were, and imagine how difficult this must have been to know they've got a serial killer murdering men in the area, but because of all these external circumstances at the time, because of the lifestyles of the victims, it's nearly impossible to trace them, to trace their last days, or to know who they had been with. This was just a time of a lot of death and devastation in that area, and sadly the murder victims kind of took a back seat. And then Ricky Wallace talked with his probation officer, and the case broke wide open. That's what leads them to Ronald Dominique and finally gives them the break they've been looking for. After speaking with him once, investigators returned and asked Ronald for a buccal swab, a swab of the inside of his mouth. The police were actually surprised when Ronald submitted to the test. Again, this made them doubt if he was their guy or not. Ronald Dominique didn't seem to fully understand the position he was in. Police thought he might have assumed that they were just grasping at straws. But in fact, Ronald was their only suspect. Their only suspect in the murders of now 23 men. While investigators waited for the DNA results to come back, they put Ronald under 24-hour surveillance. They didn't want him murdering someone else while they waited for those results. In late November 2006, the first result came back and they had a match. The DNA taken from Ronald Dominique matched DNA found on Manuel Reed in 1999. They then found a DNA match to semen found on Oliver LeBancs, murdered in 1998. Ronald knew the police were following him. One day, for reasons known only to him, he packed up and left his trailer and moved into a homeless shelter downtown. And that's where he was when the police went to arrest him. December 1st, 2006. Officers arrive here at the Bunkhouse men's shelter in order to take Ronald Dominique into custody. He surrenders without issue and is placed in handcuffs. Ronald Dominique is pretending to be feeble. He's walking with a cane, and he says he needs help getting into the police van. No one is really buying it. Just weeks earlier, he had assaulted and murdered a 6-foot-tall man and then dragged his body up a dirt road, so they thought this was all an act. The investigators and then the public breathed a sigh of relief, believing that the serial killer had been caught. His entire demeanor changed once Ronald was in the interrogation room. The floodgates opened and he began to talk in detail about the many, many murders he committed. Ronald tells officers that the first victim was picked up for sex, but Ronald felt his partner was being too rough with him. Ronald picked up a tire iron and hit the man with it. Once the man was unconscious, Ronald reported a feeling of immense relief. Now he had a victim he could do with as he chose. Now he had a victim who couldn't say no to him, who couldn't abandon him. Obviously, this is very similar to Jeffrey Dahmer, who incapacitated his victims in order to have full control over them and to make it so they couldn't leave him. He had major abandonment issues, and so did Ronald Dominique. Ronald told the police that this moment was a moment that changed him forever, and that's when he knew he was going to kill again. Like I've said over and over, we tend to focus on the things that we believe make us different from other people. No matter how far our society evolves, we can never seem to get away from the tribalism that is buried deep in our primal brains. We like to categorize people. My therapist calls it othering. We other people. If we other people, those other people over there, we dehumanize them. They're those people over there. They're the other people. The fact is, and will always remain, my friends, there are very few things that truly separate us. Some of us have more money than others. Some of us are straight and some of us are gay. Some of us are happy and some of us are sad. But at the end of the day, we all want a lot of the same things. We want a nice, safe home to lay our heads in at night. We want to be surrounded by the people we love and who love us. We want to be healthy and we want to be cared for. And if we all just focused on what we love, if we all just minded our own damn business and let others mind theirs, only stepping in when we were truly concerned, not pretending to be concerned to feed our own egos, the world would be a better place. I've got enough trouble and problems of my own. I do not need to worry about what anyone else is doing in their bedrooms or about a man in a dress and makeup. I don't care what you're doing with your dangly bits in your bedroom. Live and let live. Get involved when you see actual harm being done and stop with the performative crap on both sides of the fence. We got to stick together, my friends, because not only are we fighting a system that wants to keep us at war with each other, we're living among monsters. Monsters like Ronald Dominique. We got enough on our plate without making up problems. After admitting to many of the murders, the trial was pretty much a no-brainer. Ronald Dominique was given 8 life sentences for killing 23 men. Not all of the victims received their own trials, but what happened is enough to keep Ronald behind bars. He is currently 59 years old and sits inside the Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola. Even though some of his victims and their families will never see justice in the form of a trial, at least this monster is locked away, right where he belongs, and he will stay there until he takes his last breath. Thank you for joining me today on Dining with Death, True Crime Tuesday, and for staying for my rant. We're all just one big family, you guys, and it would be easier if we just accept that. I am certainly glad that you are part of my little family here. Your support means the world to me. Hit the like button if you liked the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me, and you can also join my Patreon. That is really turning out to be the thing that's keeping me afloat right now, because this is a tough platform. The end goal on Patreon is to raise money for police departments that have cold case DNA in storage that cannot be tested because there is no money to test it. We want to help with that. So if you can, join my Patreon. It keeps the channel going, and it's eventually going to help with a very good cause. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other, and I'll see you next time on Dining with Death. Bye.